It's not the house that's haunted. It's your son.
What's your favorite scary movie?
What's the boogeyman?
As a matter of fact, it was.
What is going on, my spooky listeners from all over the world? Back again with another Slashers in Sync episode. I am, of course, MJ, but I am not going to be joined by Marvelous today. We are sadly going to be missing her on this episode. She's been having a very rough week, and she just wants to take a break this week, and she'll be back on the following week where we'll be discussing something hopefully interesting. Maybe not another film. I really want to do Reddit stories. We'll try and get back on that. There's actually a few stories that I've seen come up on TikTok that I've been wanting to actually dive into, because, you know, TikTok does that thing where they like play half of the story for you and then like cut, and then you have to go look for a part two, and then you can't find part two anywhere. Yeah, I don't want that to happen. So Marvelous and I will probably be looking up some cool Reddit stories and going through all this, you know, just spooky and horrific stories that people put out there, whether they're fake or real or not. We want to dive into those and take a break from films. But I'm actually very happy to talk about this film specifically. Hatchet, 2006 slasher film directed by Adam Green. This is probably one of the, how can I say, this film brought back a very interesting take on the horror genre, just because of it being a 2006 horror film, which released in the US in 2007, to be more specific. It pretty much just embodies that grunge 2000s look, just the way people styled their hair, the way we dressed, a lot of metal bands and comic shirts, but very old, and it's just so dope. Like what you would think a Hot Topic of like 2009 looked like, that's what this film looks like, and it's so fucking good. Also, one of the cool things about this film is that writer and director Adam Green created a no-CGI rule for post-production. The only CGI that was used on this entire movie was just to remove like screen wires and stuff like that. Everything is practical effects, which I think just make the kills that much more entertaining. Because let's keep it a buck, man. The kills in this movie, I'm not trying to say that, you know, Terrifier is taking what Hatchet did, but let's just say Victor Crowley walked so art could run, like quite literally. These films are gory. They're not afraid to be gross. They're not afraid to push that boundary. I mean, one of the opening sequences after the opening credits is that a guy is just vomiting, like straight up. And it's not like that, you know, very safe, like just like a little bit of spit hanging from the lip movie vomit. No, this is, you're seeing chunks of actual fucking food, because Adam Green is a madman and doesn't want just practical effects. He wants real effects, and literally had one of the actors vomit for real in this film. And when he had to do a second take, he had to drink orange juice and eat clam chowder and then vomited again. So like it, this movie pushes that boundary. It is right there, and it is pretty disgusting. Very much like how in Terrifier, you'll see people shitting and pissing. Like it happens quite often. So this movie isn't afraid to push that boundary and just kind of go into an area to where you're just not that comfortable for many different reasons. And I'll be honest with you, even though I can sit down and watch a movie where a guy gets completely gutted, you are not going to catch me inside watching a movie where a guy throws up. I have to look away, especially if I got food on my table and I'm watching the movie while I'm eating it. That's not going to happen, dog. Not going to happen whatsoever. Also, speaking of the opening credits, what's cool about the Hatchet franchise is that, and I'm specifically going to be talking about just the first one, but I did want to make mention of the other three, is that watching the two films that follow the first one, if you cut out like the opening and end credits, it's pretty much like a full-on story that just takes place within like 72 hours, if not maybe just an extra day added on that. Very much reminds me of the Friday the 13th franchise. And Marvin and I talked about this on the Friday the 13th episode, if you want to go check that out as well, where we discussed how Jason is literally just waking up after being beat down in one movie and then going to another area of the camp in the next. And then like every film just takes place literally right after the ending of the previous one. And I just find that hilarious because it's only like, what, 3 to 5 days in a span of, I guess, movies 2 to 5, like it, or 2 to 4. Like it's kind of funny when you think about it like that. And Hatchet kind of follows a similar route. And speaking of Jason is Kane Hodder. I can't believe it. The cameos in this movie are just out of this world. So we have Kane Hodder, right, who played Jason a lot of times, and he's actually known as one of the main portrayers of Jason, the one behind the mask. Seeing him be the father to Victor Crowley in this film, and then also play Victor Crowley as well later on as the ghost version, it was super cool to see him back, and just to see him have like another franchise under his belt is pretty awesome. And speaking of franchises, we have Robert Englund in the opening sequence. Yeah, Freddy Krueger, man. You don't get any more epic than that. Like having Freddy Krueger in this fucking movie, but just have it be Robert Englund playing like an asshole, I guess, hick in the boonies, right, in the swamp area, and then just get completely torn to shreds in the beginning is hilarious, but also just wonderful. And Robert Englund has played in a lot of like straight to DVD films throughout his years, especially like the sci-fi horror films. So I'm pretty sure he just loves making scary movies and just loves to either be a villain or just be someone who just gets killed off in 2 seconds in the most evil way possible. We also have Tony Todd, and rest in peace to the late great Tony Todd, man. It sucks a lot that I'm doing this episode after his passing. It's also going to suck a lot more when Marvelous and I are talking about movie 2, because Tony Todd has a pretty big role in that film. So, but Tony Todd has been known to, yeah, just like Candyman, you know, Final Destination, even like smaller parts like in Hellfest and stuff like that. Like he just has left his mark in Hollywood as being just a horror icon, a horror legend. And I mean, most recently he gained a whole new audience when he voiced Venom in the Spider-Man 2 game, the sequel. So Tony Todd is just up there with the best of them, and it just sucks that we lost him so early on. But anyways, man, going back into Hatchet. Even though Danielle Harris is known for the role of Mary Beth, she actually isn't in this first film. Director Adam Green didn't want to be accused of doing stunt casting by putting an iconic horror actress in the lead, because Danielle Harris is from the Halloween franchise, where she played Jamie, a pretty prominent character in that version of the Halloween story. So he ended up going with Amara instead, but he did change his mind for the sequels when he realized that putting her in the lead would actually be a bonus to the films. And Amara didn't really want to come back anyway, so it just made more sense for Danielle Harris to take on that role. And again, similar to Kane Hodder, it's just dope that Danielle Harris got more respect and just a different franchise of her own to play another significant character and not just be Jamie from the Halloween franchise. The budget did have $1.5 million, but they only brought in about $208,000 at the box office. However, it did make a lot of its money back when it hit home media, because when it released on DVD in December of 2007, they had multiple versions released, the theatrical cut and the unrated director's cut, and the director's cut having a lot more gore. Now, the film made about $6 million in the US just based off of rentals alone, and then the film then sold over 597,000 copies, which I believe is about $8 million. So the movie made its money back, and then that's a pretty hot topic right now. I'm not going to get into the political reasons behind it, but with physical media becoming extinct, it's interesting to see just how much physical media could just save a movie, because even if it flopped in the box office, it could make its return back when it came to physical sales, both in DVDs and Blu-ray at the time, which makes a lot of sense because the films that I grew up watching were a lot of straight to DVD movies, and I'm sure they made a lot of money through their physical selves. So it does suck that we are now going down a road where it's just going to be strictly digital downloads and just streaming stuff. But ultimately, a film like this, even though it didn't break the bank at the box office, it was still able to make its return. And it does have a cult following now, and I can see why after watching this, because as someone who's been to multiple horror conventions, not just on my own, but also with Marvelous, we've seen a lot of merch for Victor Crowley. I've seen the character before. I've even seen YouTube clips of just him, not so much the kills, but just of the character. So I can understand that he is a known entity, but it's not like he's up there with like Jason Voorhees or Michael Myers or even the different versions of Ghostface. You would have to be a horror fan to really know who this character is and to know what his movies are all about. And I'm happy to say that Marvelous and I are in that bunch now to where we can say that's who that is. And we know what those fucking movies are all about, and we fucking love every second of them. But now, finally getting into the plot of the film. The plot revolves around this swamp area that's also known as the Victor Crowley area, right? And Samson and his son Ainsley are not supposed to be here. They're not supposed to be hunting alligators here, but they do. And they're ultimately killed, but not by an alligator. They are killed by something that we do not see, and it is so strong that it is literally tearing them apart. We're talking body parts flying, just being torn off limb by limb. You would think it's a wild animal, but it is definitely not. We then transition into Mardi Gras in New Orleans, so that's pretty cool. Usually in a lot of Hollywood films, they're like either in the middle of nowhere or they're on the East Coast or the West Coast. So it's cool to finally see a New Orleans style film, just because New Orleans has a lot more history behind it. If Marva was here, she would go a lot more into like the witchcraft and the hauntings and the supernatural that happened there. I don't really know too much about it, just more of like the ghosts in certain areas, but overall, like, it is cool to see a film take place there. And our main characters are going to be Ben and his best friend Marcus, who are there to celebrate Mardi Gras after his breakup with his girl. And keep in mind, he's being a complete bitch about it, I'll be real, and doesn't want to do nothing but just talk about his chick, even though there's little girls walking around with nothing on and just yayas flying all over the place, and he is not moved a single inch by it, like not at all. And of course, instead of wanting to party with all the girls he's around, he wants to go on a swamp tour. Of course, no one wants to do that. Marcus is heavily against it, but ultimately does it because Marcus is a stand-up dude. And they go check it out. They run into the guide, Rev Zombie. He was being sued, so he couldn't do what he needed to do. Rev Zombie is played by Tony Todd, so it was cool to see him in that role. Very similar outfit to the film Hellfest, if y'all have seen Hellfest. We also covered that on the podcast as well, if y'all want to check that out. Now, I don't know if this like Hellfest was paying homage to his character Rev Zombie here, but very similar style and aesthetic. Once you see Hellfest, you'll know what I'm talking about. And he ends up pointing them down to an inexperienced tour guide by the name of Sean. Ben and Marcus show up, and that's where Sean leads them to his tour bus where the other tourists are at. We're introduced to Jim and Shannon. They're an elder couple. We're introduced to two models, Misty, Jenna, and their agent Shapiro, and a young Mary Beth. Now, this movie does have its awkwardness, and a lot of it is with Ben and Mary Beth, specifically because Ben just wants to just talk about his girl. I think Marvin and I made a joke that as soon as he sits down, he just word vomits about his relationship, and it's like, bruh, Mary Beth didn't even look at you. You're just talking. Like, what the fuck? It has a lot of moments like that, which it is there for comedy, but it does lead to a lot of the awkwardness of it. But I don't mind it because, as Marvelous and I had said when we were watching the film, it kind of pays to that 2000s era of, you know, just movies in general. And I mean, a lot of it just reminded me of like Twilight, you know, and the interactions between the Edward character and Bella. Like, it was pretty awful with Ben and Mary Beth, but overall I had a fun time with it because I was able to make fun of it, which I think it is just there to be made fun of. I mean, it's not to be taken seriously. As they venture onto this, I guess, tour with a tour guide that has no idea where he's going, they come across a character by the name of Jack Cracker. Adam Green is fucking diabolical to name someone Jack Cracker. But yeah, he has a character there who's giving them warnings, and the tour guide does not listen to them. They end up even venturing farther than what they should. The boat begins to sink because the dumbass hit something and scraped it. Jim then tries to get out. This is the husband and the older couple. And he wants to, go for help. He ends up getting injured by an alligator, and then everyone is forced to get off because the boat's now sinking even faster. And of course, there's alligators. But once they make it to the land, Mary Beth starts saying that, it's probably not a good idea that we're on land. Everyone's kind of confused, and she explains, well, this dude did not explain the Victor Crowley story all that well, and that's where we get into the backstory. Now, Victor Crowley was a deformed kid, like horribly deformed, and he lived with his father, Thomas. Now, they lived in a house out there in the swamp, and they would do everything together. I believe they mentioned at this point that Thomas was, I believe, a widow. He didn't have his wife. She had passed. We come to find out more about this story later, but we'll get into that once we review 2 and 3. Now, in this story, Thomas would take Victor everywhere. He wasn't ashamed of his son. And when he would take him everywhere, the kids would come out and pretty much bully him. So much so that they would actually bully him on multiple occasions. And one time, it got really bad, especially on Halloween. So Thomas stepped away and Victor was left alone at the shack, and the kids came up and they were dressed up and pretty much lit his house on fire. And this is a very horrible backstory for multiple reasons, not just because of the bullying, but because of what happens next. And when Thomas finally makes it back, he's trying to save Victor from the house that's burning, or the shack that's burning. And he gets an axe to break down the door, and he sadly kills his own son with the hatchet. It is horrible, man. It really is. And after Thomas's eventual death, Victor is now said to roam the swamp as a vengeful spirit, killing those he comes across, almost reliving that night over and over. Mary Beth warns the group that they aren't safe in the swamp, but they don't listen to her, and they just think it's an urban legend that this is really going to happen. They rather be on land and be safe versus be in the swamp where there's alligators. As Jim and Shannon then find the shack and start to approach it, Victor appears and starts killing them. What do you know? Mary Beth was right. And Victor kills them horrible. I believe these two have the worst death in the, film overall. I don't want to say franchise because there's some crazy ones in 2 and 3, but definitely in this film. Funny enough, Jim is the only one to get killed by a hatchet in this movie, which is kind of funny. But when he gets killed with the hatchet, man, this is all some Terrifier shit. Like, there's blood everywhere. He's chopping him up, dude, like literally in half with this, just wailing on Jim. His body is just torn in half. Limbs are coming off. Like, it's insane how crazy this kill is. And then an even crazier kill is when he runs after Shannon, grabs her mouth. One hand is on the top mouth, one hand on the bottom, and literally pulls it back so hard that you see the skin on her cheeks tearing, just rips her fucking head off, and like her tongue is just sticking out from her body, from her throat, just swarming like a freaking fish, dude. It's insane. The practical effects go so hard in this fucking movie, man. It's gas, man. And Victor, this goes on a killing spree after this. Now, these kills are the worst ones in this movie, just because the other ones kind of take a back seat. Very, just someone's leg getting chopped off or someone getting impaled with a shovel. And one character's even killed off screen. But even those minor kills, they're very much gory. There's blood everywhere. While at the house, Mary Beth and Ben discover Samson and Ainsley's remains. Mary Beth reveals they were her father and brother, and she had come to the swamp to find their bodies. That's the whole reason why she's even on this tour. They then come up with the plan to lure Victor back to the house and set him on fire with gasoline tanks. Pretty much the idea that if they burn him, that should get rid of him because the fire is what originally killed him. Now, this, however, doesn't go the way it should because it literally starts raining right after they light him on fire. And they're pretty much aware that this is probably going to fuck their whole plan up because Victor is a lot like Jason Voorhees. He is not a human being. He is an actual ghost. So he's been shot in this film. He's been impaled in this film. He's been stabbed in this film. He was even lit on fire and nothing works. He keeps coming back, like quite literally, not in a day, not in 24 hours, not even like in 3 years, like in Jeepers Creepers or whatever the time limit is. He comes back immediately. After chasing Marcus, Ben, and Mary Beth, Victor kills Marcus, and then Ben's foot is impaled by a pole thrown by Victor from the cemetery area. Mary Beth and Ben push the pole forward, resulting in Victor to be impaled on it when he charges after them. And they believe that they kill him. They then go looking for a spare boat to head back into the swamp so they can escape the area. Mary Beth falls into the water and is ensnared by seaweed. She sees Ben's hand at the surface, reaches up to be pulled out, only to be met by Victor, who had severed Ben's arm and used it to bait Mary Beth. So this motherfucker is smart. He isn't just playing around, man. The film ends with Victor grabbing Mary Beth as Ben lies dying on the boat, almost like an homage and reference to the Friday the 13th film, where Jason comes up from the boat and pretty much pulls Alice into the water. However, this is the opposite, where Mary Beth is coming through the water and Victor is the one pulling her up into the boat. So I kind of like that idea. A lot of homages and stuff to a lot of past horror films. You can tell the respect is there in this film, and I appreciate that a lot. But overall, that's how the movie ends, and I had a fun time with it. It's not that long of a movie. I think it's about like 73 minutes, maybe a little bit longer. So overall, it's a good watch, and I can highly recommend it to anybody who is interested in watching a slasher film. Like I said on multiple occasions, it encapsulates that 2000s grunge era, and if you're a fan of that, you're really gonna like this. I can definitely see why it's a cult classic, and it spawned multiple sequels. Even a comic book series is followed, and very few horror stories do get the comic book treatment. So seeing this get that, it's pretty dope, man, and I can't wait to even read into those after we finish watching the rest of the films. But overall, let me know what you think about Hatchet and how this film pertains to other slasher films, and if you think it lives up to the films of today. I mean, Marva and I watched this before she went to Japan, and we loved every second of it. We were so, just engulfed in the story that we immediately went into movie 2 right afterwards. So we cannot wait to watch the 4th one and just kind of continue this franchise and cover it on the channel, man. But anyways, if you like this, make sure to subscribe to the podcast, follow us on Spotify as well, and comment down below any other movies that you think we might be interested in watching. Anyways, this is MJ on Slashers and Sync, and I will talk to y'all next time.